So right now I'm in my shed out behind my house. I usually come in here to find some quiet peace to work on writing and making music and just creations in general. But right now I'm talking about the idea I have for a 10-part series, something of kind of these mini movies that would be, I'd say, an hour in length or so. But this will be about the big four, the of metal in the '80s. There were tons of great bands back then, especially on the heavier side. What I'm shooting for, but right now I'm just kind of going for the core four of them. Beginning with Metallica, and then of which came Megadeth, and then intertwined with Megadeth, who had Slayer, who had band members that played alongside with each other, and then Anthrax, of course, that was kind of the low guys on the totem pole, but they were those little heavy hitters from the street. And if it wasn't for Scotty Ian and Dan Locher, who were initial members in Anthrax, the boys in Metallica would have had kind of a rough way to go when it came to their situation after Johnny Zazula called them to trek about, I want to say, close to 3,000 miles in that old beat-up U-Haul all the way back to Rochester, just so that they could, I think, no, they recorded in Rochester, but Zazula lived in New Jersey, but they came all the way back there, and they stayed in a building in Jamaica, Queens, called the Music Factory, or the Music Building is what they called it, and it was an old, run-down joint that used to be a hospital, but then after that closed down, there was a bunch of bands that just rented the place, or there were people that rented the place out for bands to practice. And there was like several floors of it, and the place was filthy and awful and smelled horrible. And so basically all three of the guys, because at that point David Mustaine had been omitted from the group, they were all staying in that one little space, sleeping on the cold hard floor. They didn't have a lot to drink, and they didn't have a lot to eat at all. Scott Ian and Dan Locher from Anthrax, they came in one day, bringing in salami and bread. Like, you guys want a toaster? It's like, we got some bread, cheesy shit. But and then there was one point where Dan Locher took Mustaine back home. Yeah, okay, so Dave Mustaine was still in the band at that point, but he took him back to his house, his parents' house that he was staying at, so that Dave could shower. I think James Hetfield went back with Scott, and so on and so forth. The rest of the guys, they were kind of doing a little round robin so that they could help the poor guys get cleaned up, because they couldn't really shower over there. There was nothing at that building. But on the way there, Dan offered Dave Mustaine 2 slices of pizza. So that little bit went a long way. Dave Mustaine still talks about that kindness. But anyways, I'm kind of getting off topic. But essentially, that's just kind of a snapshot as to how these bands' lives all intertwined with each other early in those days. I could go on for a long time. There's a lot more to that. Kerry King from Slayer was in Megadeth for a brief period of time when Slayer in the beginning wasn't the same Slayer that we know today. And they were, Kerry was kind of tired of their style, and he was playing, and when Dave was throwing together Megadeth, which was, about as heavy and fast as you could get at the time being, Kerry was really interested in that. But then he found a way that he could rekindle Slayer's flame and turn them into even, into kind of what we knew today, and then so on and so forth. And they put out Rain of Blood. The rest of that is history. And even the smaller bands on that, like the ones that weren't necessarily part of the Big Four, but they were close to it, and they were part of that close San Franciscan brotherhood of those old ragers down, back in '82 Exodus. I mean, that's where Kirk Hammett came from. And even there was a point, especially when that Dave Mustaine talks about in his book, where him and the guys in Exodus got pretty close too. Like even had like this little weird blood ritual and things like that. There's other funny things like little small details. There was one point where they were all living at Mark Whitaker's house on I think it was 5151 Carlston Boulevard. I might have the numbers wrong, but I know that's the street, and that was Mark Whitaker's house. But they would throw parties in there all day long, continuously. And there was one point where they were all drinking vodka and they didn't have any chasers left. So James went into a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of log cabin syrup, and that was what they were using to chase it. I think not all of us have been there, but I certainly can relate to that in some instances. But I think the not to get too far off track, but the big thing that I'm getting at is there's a lot of small details that are important to that whole story that I'm really interested in implementing in there. And so what I'm really looking for is a team that's as interested as I am in representing that story as properly as possible. Kind of to get back more into the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. I think it needs more time. I just can't put that all into a 2-hour movie, and even at that, a lot of people fall asleep at the 2-hour mark anyways. So there's a lot of nerds out there like me that are really keen on these details that would love to see them come to light, and frankly, so would I. So.